we'll build off from there.
Okay. So my name is Thuan Le Elston. I was born in Saigon in 1966. My dad was an editor of an English language weekly. He was fluent in English, French, and Mandarin. And so he knew months out ahead of time that the end was coming, and he told my mom to start preparing. I'm the oldest of five, and she started sewing us backpacks, and I remember that spring of 1975 being really surprised when she took us to buy tennis shoes. Like we've only had flip-flops and sandals, but never tennis shoes. And I guess the thinking was they were afraid if we had to walk overland to some sort of refugee camp situation. But what turned out to happen was the night of April 21st, 1975, President Thieu was on TV resigning, and my parents-in-law packed each of us a change of clothing, and he was a photographer as a hobby, and he had all these photo albums, and he just started stripping all the photos from the albums into plastic bags. So that's why we're lucky enough to have all these family photos, because my dad thought enough. He said this is the only legacy I'm going to leave my children. So that's what he did. And then three of my aunts were married to American soldiers, veterans, and one of them was still living in Saigon with all of us, and he was an American pilot, and so he was able to get documents to help us all leave. So the next morning we met him at Thuan Airport in Saigon. We were among thousands standing in line that day, and finally at 9 p.m. we were allowed on an American C-130 cargo plane, and it was for my parents, I'm sure they were very worried and fearful, but for us, I was not even 9 years old. It was all of our first times getting on airplanes. We were very excited. This is a big adventure. We had had a very strange day. We've been playing with a lot of other kids all day long, even though we were standing all in line together. My American uncle came out and had given us sandwiches, and so it was very strange not eating rice for the day, but having this American sandwich. And then we got on this airplane, and we were strapped in. It was like a lot of people sitting on the ground of the cargo plane, but my family had seats next to each other and strapped in. And once we took off, it was nighttime, but my dad noticed that the soldiers were coming around checking on the windows, and my dad, as an English speaker, he said, "So what's going on?" And they said that our plane was actually shot at as it was taking off, but luckily it was at night, so now they're just checking. So they figured out it was one of the wings got nicked by a bullet or two, but God, we made it to Manila. We spent 1 week at the U.S. Air Force Base in Manila, and then, one night in Manila, a week at the U.S. military base in Guam, where we slept in Quonset huts on bunk beds. That was where we learned April 30th through the BBC radio. My dad was able to translate for everybody in our unit, translate into Vietnamese that Saigon had just fallen. And then from there, we spent a month in Camp Pendleton outside of San Diego at the U.S. Marine camp there, refugee camp. And that was where we reunited with my mom's siblings and their families and my grandmother. And then from there, a bunch of us, my extended family, we got sponsored to Arizona and California. So that was 75. We got in Phoenix. my family was sponsored by a Lutheran church, Mount of Olives Lutheran Church, and uh, the they rented us a house, um, and a 2-bedroom home with with one bathroom for us, my parents and us 5 kids, and so we grew up in Phoenix, and we went through Arizona State. Um, the that summer we were among hundreds of families, other Vietnamese refugee families in Phoenix, and the churches and the social agencies, um, and the state government got together, and they organized English classes for kids, English classes for adults, training sessions, and things like that. And so I went through that summer English classes at churches, and then we just went straight into our grades. I mean, and to think of it now, you think of it, it's so strange. But I remember clearly one day just thinking how to spell. I knew how to spell every, and I knew how to spell body. And this was 4th grade, but I didn't know how to spell everybody. The concept of, but I also knew the word party, and for some reason, maybe it's my personality, I thought it was spelled every party instead of everybody. That was just like the weird stuff that sticks in your mind, as to what happened that summer. And there were long periods in class where I didn't understand anything, and I would just sit. But some of the other girls, like, I guess they must have explained to the other kids that this school was getting 5 Vietnamese kids who didn't know how to speak English and stuff, and they told everyone to be kind to us, I guess, or whatever. But the girls just kind of adopted me and took turns asking me over to spend the night, to which my parents were, it was to them such a foreign concept of sending their kids off to, I spent lots of nights at my cousin's house, but this was, how is a strange American family gonna receive our kid? What if she wakes up in the middle of the night crying or whatever? But they knew it was important for us to assimilate quickly, and spending time with other kids was the quickest way to learn English. But that was basically my first year in Phoenix.
Okay, thank you for that. Phone turned off, sorry. I mean, you were pretty young, obviously, but what can you talk about as far as like how the political climate and events in Vietnam and during the post-war period influence? Well, this isn't really. It was more so like this is
Pre-war. It's
yeah.
So, like, my dad was a journalist, but in my class, in my 3rd grade class, there were certainly children of generals, and all of our dads had been through the military one time or another. And of course, at home, you can't help but hear your parents talking or whatnot. Then their gossip would become our gossip, right? Like, even 3rd graders, and we're like in school and telling them, yeah, the commies are coming in, and maybe what we could do is, you're really good with a slingshot, and maybe we should dig a trench, and we'll hide under, and if they come in, we just shoot slingshot. I mean, it was the stupidest things, but it was so silly. But years later, a couple of my friends who hadn't gotten out that 75 that came over later, and we reminisce about those silly, stupid stories. Yeah. But I knew that the one night, maybe a month before we left, we all gathered at the house where my aunt and this American pilot husband, one of my older uncles, was a colonel, and he had been part of the negotiation team that had gone to Paris and negotiated the end of the war and negotiated the swapping of prisoners of war. So he was there also. Um, and so if he was there, he was such a big, important man in our family that I knew if he was there, then it was a very serious meeting. All the adults were inside. They were talking about how we're all going to leave, like, and whether we can leave as a whole big family or divide it up. And all of us kids were outside playing, but looking back now, I knew that was the meeting. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fear, but two of my aunts had to make very big decisions. They had toddlers, but their husbands were still out on the front. So they didn't want to leave without my uncles until my uncles came back. So they chose to stay. One of them was pregnant. So my grandmother, and now I can't believe it, but basically she was in her late 50s in 75, and she had to pretend that her two youngest grandkids were her own kids so that she can get them out to go with us. They had to, at the security to getting into the airport, she had to lie to the people asking, how can you be this old and have kids this young? But their mothers didn't want to leave, but they sent these two toddlers with my grandmother to get them out. So the aunts and uncles who had to stay, their kids, different aunts adopted them, and one of them was adopted by my aunt who lives in Hawaii with her Japanese American husband. They raised Tommy as their own and very close. When his real parents came over with his real siblings finally in the 80s, it was a very strained relationship, because he considers these people his parents now, and these are his real parents who came over. And but there's no bond there. They didn't wake up in the middle of the night. They didn't feed him. They didn't bring him through school. They didn't raise him. And so even though they acknowledge each other, but they were never able to renew that blood bond. But it was very much a nature versus nurture sort of thing, and these are the people who raised me. So even though our family didn't, we were very lucky compared with other families. We weren't broke people. Nobody died. Several uncles spent years in re-education camps in Vietnam and suffered, certainly. But at the end of the day, we're all here together. But some of the separation of the love certainly happened.
With that, you're answering like a lot of the questions we have, like all in one, which is great. Because you talked about your socialization when you arrived in the United States. Is there any like obviously you talked about like your influence in school when you first came and how socialization in that sense was a big deal. Were there any like struggles of kind of like assimilating that made it like difficult for you to, I guess like, maintain that connection to your homeland, but also like develop a new?
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's a struggle. It was certainly a journey, because all those hundreds of families who came over together, we bonded during those English classes and those community sessions. So we all met each other and we all took each other's phone numbers, and so every weekend we would do things at each other's homes. We would take turns holding these huge parties, because it's, it's Arizona, it's the desert. We weren't like minority because there's already so many Spanish speakers and Native Americans, and my school certainly was a very big mix. But Asians were definitely among the minorities. And my parents, honestly, when on that plane coming to America, they thought if they were lucky, we would get taken in by a farming family, and that's what they see of American movies. So all they think is these big expanse spaces, and it's a lot of cowboys. So maybe we'll work on a ranch, and if we're lucky, we can drive several hours and find somewhere to buy rice. So that maybe once, but it'll be a lot of sandwiches and working on a ranch was what my parents thought of our life in America would be. But here, no, we were in the Phoenix metropolitan area, so we got together every weekend to cook. So even though these women, they weren't cooks, they didn't own restaurants back in Vietnam. They were clerical workers. Some of them were wives to really big wigs, like wives to generals and stuff. But everybody was in the same boat, so to speak. My mom, um, my dad, even though he was an editor with an English language weekly, he was a very educated man, but his first job was with a company that fixes refrigerators, and so he lifted heavy refrigerators for several years before he got an assembly line job. And my mom, when my dad was at work, and when we were at school, she would go clean other people's homes. She was a dishwasher in a restaurant. She and my dad did not like it. He did not want her to work. She just went out to work anyways, and I'm just not going to tell him. We have to have extra money. What am I going to do? I'm not just going to sit home. So, but all these women, they taught each other. Oh, I know how to make bánh xèo, that yellow crepe thing that we had for lunch. That was one of the things somebody taught all the rest of the other women how to make. So on a huge Saturday, in the kitchen, all the wives would be teaching each other how to make specialty like pho and noodles and bánh cuốn and everything aside from the normal rice and soup and meat dishes. They would teach each other that. The husbands would be talking and reminisce and catching up. The children were playing, and then once the food was ready, we'd all sit on floors, just every space on the floor. There was no room to walk. We would all just sit together and eat. And then pretty soon we planned our first road trip to California together. 25 cars driving in a row from Phoenix into LA, and stayed at Orange County, where somebody had friends and then somebody had relatives. So we just all slept in all these strangers, but all Vietnamese families' homes. And so those are things that we did to bond each other. But then during the week, we'd go back to going to our own separate schools, where we were not only the only Vietnamese, but the only Asians. Maybe there were a couple of other Chinese families in that school, right? So I didn't know, but me being the oldest, yes, I was fluent in Vietnamese, but I was also a very romantic child. So I was already reading Vietnamese literature and Vietnamese poetry. And so actually some of the teenager Vietnamese would share their books that they brought with them out of Vietnam. We would pass them around each other like a secret library. One would have it for the week, and next week change book. And so that was my way of staying in touch with my language. But then once we got into college, Arizona State University, all of a sudden all of us Vietnamese were in one place together, and so we formed Vietnamese American Friendship Society, and we had a literary magazine. I was, of course, the editor, because no one read as much as I did, and I was the club secretary. We taught each other Vietnamese dances and songs, and we would put on Lunar New Year shows, the bed shows once a year for the community. And I didn't know how much of that part of myself I missed until I found we were all in one place together and doing all these things together. Yeah.
Um, sorry, I don't know where you put it. Okay, so this one is kind of, we talked a little bit to you kind of in the car about how we're really excited to talk to like a mother and daughter, and we really want to like frame our narratives in kind of like that familial generational sense. And we just kind of came up with a question. It's really simple. Just one. How would you describe your mom in like one word, and then like why and
One word.
or a couple. We can.
Well, one word would be formidable. I used to think, and she and I both thought that growing up that I was my father's child. I was his favorite, but it was after he passed away in Phoenix in 1991. He was only 58 years old. He died of a brain aneurysm. But it was about that time that she and I figured out, actually, that I was more like her. He was a romantic, he was literary, he was a musician. So, and I'm a dreamer. I never could concentrate in school, and she would just think that I would just not amount to anything. And I would start trying to draw, and for an assignment, and instead of drawing one thing, I would start humming to myself and daydreaming, and I would end up drawing something else. And my mom, she used to hit me on the hands with a ruler. But I went through Arizona State, and everybody else was majoring in engineering and business, and she said, people who are literally fresh off the boat are majoring in engineering. You've been here, your English is so good, you're gonna major in engineering. So I signed up for industrial engineering at Arizona State. I was in the computer lab all day long. I didn't eat. I could not figure out anything. And even when my friends tried to explain things to me, it was just, and I couldn't figure things out. I failed. I was on the dean's list, not for a good way. I had D's. I was not eating. I was fainting. I had bronchitis. I was anemic. I was fainting all over the place. Like the ER, not only at ASU, but around my house in Phoenix, knew me so well. And finally, my mom was just like, okay, I give up. You major in anything you want. And I knew English and history would not get me a job. I'm the oldest. The pressure is, if you're the oldest, you try and get a job as fast as possible to help your parents and to help your younger siblings. So I thought, fine, journalism. So I majored in journalism. But I got in at the Arizona Republic and then the LA Times, and that was the first time I moved out of my parents' home. I didn't, while at ASU I was a commuter student. I lived at home, but finally moving to LA was my first time living by myself, and it was then that I knew I was more like my mom, because she, like I said before, my dad thinks he can tell her what to do. He never was able to tell her what to do. He was always the one who cried. She never cried. In fact, the very first time I saw her cry, I was so scared. I thought the world was going to end because my mom was crying, like, what is going on? And it was that first Christmas, the church brought over a tree and everything to celebrate Christmas. It was our first Christmas in America, and she was so touched by these strangers that she went off into the room to cry. And somebody asked, where's your mom? And so I went finding her, and she was in the bedroom crying, and it was amazing. I brought her out, and she was this person who hardly hugged us. But here, I was like terrified, but then I started cracking up at the sight of her being hugged by all these big American strangers. It was just like beyond me. Oh, she's gonna hate this because she never hugs us even. So, but she's taught me how to live, and now she's teaching me how to die. Basically, she's 83. She survived 2 cancer surgeries. She lives here, where all of her older friends are. she's seen so many deaths in this building, but not only that, but people who were once vital and vibrant, and now they need a caretaker all day long. So she wants to be prepared. She never wants to be caught unawares. So uh, she has gone through her apartment and cleaned out all the unnecessary stuff because she's seen too many people who die, their children come in, don't know where anything is, and just throw everything away. She's organized everything. Um, Pictures that don't belong to us, that belong to her siblings or her nieces and nephews, she sent them all their own photos, so we don't have to go through those. Um, she's already picked out her funeral home, her casket, what she's going to wear, how her service is going to be held. We've already paid the funeral service, the funeral home for everything. Because with inflation, the prices will go up later. She wants it written in stone. This is what we paid, and this is what we're going to get. I now have on my speed dial, first her Buddhist monk, because the Buddhist monk will have to pick the blessed day and hour of when her funeral service can be, and then the manager of the funeral home. Those are on my phone speed dial. That's such an old world term. You guys don't know what speed dial is. Yeah, so she is ready. She's very zen, and you know she tries to overcome the language barrier. She tries to speak to my kids as much as possible and laugh and whatnot and try to make jokes with them. And my siblings, this coming March, they're flying out here. Again, it's been several years, so they're flying out here so that we can all spend time with her. Yeah, so she just takes it one by day, but she still drives. She won't, in fact, we're having to negotiate with her. If something else comes up, she says no more surgery. If there's a pill, I'll take it. But no more surgery. I'm old enough. You guys are all in a good place. I'm very happy. I'm ready to join your father. And whatever will be, will be.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear. One of the other things we kind of want to touch on is like, obviously, you were all at different stages in your lives, your family, when you came over. You were obviously a child, your parents were adults, and kind of we'd like to get like a perspective on like, you obviously talked a bit about how there were different views. You guys were excited to get on a plane and do something fun, but kind of how you saw your family, in different spots. Like how was it when you arrived, and like how has that changed over time?
So we're a big family. My mom is one of 15. 13, my grandmother and 13 of her children came over in 75. We're spread out Arizona and California. But we would, my family, both my parents are big road trippers. My dad, their dream for their retirement had been to just get a mobile home, and they could just drive crisscross the country. They would love to have seen it all, but unfortunately my father passed away too soon. But in the big family, my mom was number 3. She had 2 older sisters who were very prim and proper, and you have to have standards. You don't just marry anybody, you have to have 5 standards. Job, security, family, status, whatever, I can never remember them all. But definitely no non-Vietnamese. Maybe other Asians, but no non-Vietnamese. A funny thing happened when you set up those standards. Your children are gonna break them, and you have no say in what the next generation